Hey, what's up, everybody? I'm DJ Sixsmith. Welcome to Sit Down. Citizen Bio coming to Showtime, a fascinating documentary. Trish Dolman, the director, here to talk about it. Trish, how are you?
Hi, DJ. I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's been a crazy year. It's been a wild year in a lot of different ways. And you know what? Let's just talk about everything. And biohacking is certainly a fascinating world. And listen, there's people that know a ton about it. There's people who are going to watch this that don't know much about it. So what was it like just diving into this whole world and really finding out some interesting stuff here?
Well, as a filmmaker, I am primarily interested in making films about interesting subcultures or people who are really pushing the boundaries of society. So on the poster behind me is a previous film I made called Eco Pirate, the story of Paul Watson, about Paul Watson, who's perceived as one of the most radical environmental activists. And I spent 10 years making that film. So when my friend Graham Manson came to me about this documentary he was developing about biohacking, I was immediately intrigued. Graham is really well known for sci-fi series such as Orphan Black, and currently he's working on Snowpiercer. And so he just always is behind really great and very high quality projects. So when he first came to me, I was like, oh, what is this about? And I hadn't heard about biohacking. So we did extensive research and then started filming in development. And I was just fascinated by the people involved and the different types of biohackers that exist and what they're really trying to do. And, generally defined biohacking as people doing science outside of institutions. So outside of corporations or outside of university institutions. And primarily, there's sort of a few different subsets of biohackers. Some are doing genetic editing because of the advent of CRISPR technology. You can now edit DNA in your own home or in a shed in your backyard or in your garage. And one of the very first shoots we did was with a group of biohackers who are called grinders, and they're primarily interested in human augmentation, advancing the human body or merging it with technology. So the very first shoot I went on was at a kind of very informal gathering called Grindfest. And literally, it's a group of people teaching each other how to implant microchips or magnets, behind their ear or in their hand. And I was like, wow, this is very interesting because it's not just a group of people doing stuff. There's a whole ideology behind it and an exchange, a very open exchange of information that I just thought was fascinating.
Yeah, no question about it. And you mentioned the fact that people are doing this at home. I mean, it's really like a DIY when it comes to biohacking. So what is the scariest thing when you found these people at their houses or in these shacks, really manipulating things here?
Well, it's interesting because I don't really get scared that easily. And on this very first shoot, my sound guy was like, why do I always feel like whenever I make a film with you, I'm going to get arrested? And I was like, really? I wasn't aware of that. Because when I see people doing interesting things that are pushing the boundaries, I really see those people as being responsible for social change. And what I see biohackers doing, they're able to do what they're doing really because of recent technological advances. So on the one hand, like I said, the advent of CRISPR allows anyone to edit DNA. And many biohackers, you can go online and you can take a class from Josiah Zahner or David Ishii and learn how to do this yourself. Or with the advent of very, very, very tiny microprocessors in computing technology allows us to put that in our bodies. And so I feel like a lot of the media has focused on the potential of what biohacking could do wrongly, that there could be some kind of imminent disaster. Well, that hasn't happened yet. And I don't think it will, because the truth, what I discovered, the truth is most biohackers have an altruistic kind of vision. What they're doing is trying to find a treatment or a cure for a disease, or they're trying to come up with solutions for global warming or deforestation or plastic in the oceans. I didn't discover a group of people that were scheming, to create a pandemic, for example.
No, it's really interesting you mention the altruism, because I feel like in the next 5, 10, 15 years, the conversation can totally change around biohacking. So what do you think needs to happen? Like outside of this documentary, how else can we focus more on those positive things, like you said? Because there is certainly a lot to chew on here that isn't so controversial and really is positive. So how do we change the narrative?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think there's a lot of discussion around the media, and that media needs a good story. And when I started out making this film, we really just set out to make a film about biohacking. And Aaron Trawick passed away months after we started shooting in development. And I was like, wow, what happened there? And so I think that the biohacking community, it's a very fragile ecosystem. Whenever you have kind of a nascent movement, and some of them don't even want to call it a movement, when there's a lot of focus on what the biohackers may perceive to be sensationalism. But I think what Aaron really revealed is, I think he too started out with the altruistic vision of trying to help people and trying to find cures for diseases. Because what biohacking is really a response to are gaps in the system. The fact that in the United States that not everyone has healthcare. And I think COVID-19 has really revealed inequity in the medical system, that nurses and doctors don't have access to PPE, the same PPE that, say, the police have. And I think that's all really come up this year. So biohacking is also a response, I would say, to the corporatization and marketization of science, that science is increasingly done for profit. And even in a university setting, not everyone can reach the level of a PhD. And even in that setting, you have to get grants that are corporate sponsored often. So I think biohacking is a response to those two things: a need in society for medical attention. And almost all the biohackers report having people with illnesses or rare and unique genetic diseases, that those people reach out to them for help because their needs are not being met. Because if you have a disease that 27 people in the world have, there's no financial incentive for a drug company to come up with a cure, or even a treatment for that matter, because it's not going to be profitable. And that is the reality of the world we live in. So I think biohackers are responding to that need. If you look at Tristan Roberts, for example, and one of the reasons I chose to focus on him is because he is the living embodiment of someone who has an illness, HIV, AIDS in his case, and he is trying to find an alternative treatment. He's trying to find alternative medicine that may not cost thousands and thousands of dollars, that we know HIV and AIDS medication does cost. It's been amazing. When I was young, I finished my schooling in San Francisco, and in the early 90s, and it was the peak of the AIDS crisis. So I lost friends. I had friends who passed away. I watched people who were not receiving treatment to save their lives. And it's incredible that we had scientific breakthroughs that now people can live and manage HIV. But it does create a very expensive dependency on these drugs. And sometimes people may stay in employment positions in order to have healthcare. So, I chose to follow Tristan because I thought he was a very interesting example of someone who didn't start out as a biohacker, but was someone who was willing to take a risk by doing these experimental treatments with biohackers, and then becoming a real advocate for biohacking himself.
And some people, like you said, have to do this based out of necessity, based out of the fact that they may not have health insurance, based on the fact that they can't even afford any medication that comes along. And I think that's what makes this really interesting here. And I think when people learn and watch your documentary, they will certainly see a lot of this. But what else are some of the biggest takeaways you want them to have? What are some other big surprises that people will learn about the biohacking world?
Well, what's really interesting is just how it's, there's potential for innovation in that realm. I think one thing that's happened since we stopped filming is that all of the biohackers featured in the film, pretty much all of them, are working on a vaccine for COVID-19,
Wow.
which is incredibly interesting. Not necessarily something you're going to learn from the film, but you might learn if you follow them on social media, or like I said, Josiah and David Ishii are offering an online course where you can learn how to make a vaccine for COVID-19 yourself. So that's super fascinating because, like everyone a year ago, 2 years ago, none of us would have predicted we would be in this situation. And, Josiah's been doing a lot of interviews recently and was quoted in Forbes magazine as saying, biohackers can just move much more quickly and much more nimbly. Are they the ones who are going to potentially come up with a solution? If you look at history, and I included this in the film, which is at various innovations, they came through self-experimentation. And I'm not sure people know how new the term science is. And the idea of big science is really new. And our biggest innovations came through just average people, or people who are interested in science experimenting on themselves, or through observation. If you look at the work of Louis Pasteur, and even when you get into the 20th century, Jonas Salk came up with the polio vaccine by first experimenting on himself and on his family, and then on polio survivors. And then societally, 2 million people participated in what was the largest sort of public clinical trial at the time, and it was really fast tracked in order to treat the millions of people suffering from polio. And we're about to go through that again, one would assume. So it coincidentally has made, I think, the film and what biohackers are doing all the more relevant. I think
Go ahead. No, my bad. Go ahead.
The other thing people might learn is that there are community labs in almost every city in North America. So it kind of, as part of the maker movement, and often as part of maker spaces, people have built open source labs where you can go and learn from other people how to do things like genetic engineering. In Oakland, I met an older gentleman in a community lab there who was making his own Parkinson's medication in this lab. And I'm just fascinated by that. I was like, oh, wow, that is so interesting that we have the potential, because of technological and scientific advancement, to completely democratize science. And at a time when science hasn't been democratic, it's been behind closed doors and often occurring in secrecy and heavily patented, that now people can sort of take their health and their healthcare and their medical care potentially more into their own hands. I think it's super fascinating.
I think it opens a lot of doors to potential in the future, and I think people are really going to enjoy your film. Trish, really nice to meet you. Thanks so much. Stay healthy, and we'll talk to you down the road, all right?
Thanks so much, DJ. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.